So, I literally just dropped a giant video on the Omega Rangers, the comics answer to Jason, Zach, and Trini leaving for the Peace Conference back in MMPR Season 2, and how I think by the end of the 2016 Boom comic run, they ultimately hurt the story more than they benefited it. How characters like Rocky, Adam, Zed, Tommy, and just the general concept of this being a story about the MMPRs being eclipsed by the Omega's stories and the Omega's lore, because the Omegas are just that much cooler than everyone else. And that video probably gave the impression that I disliked everything to do with the Omegas, which isn't true. I disliked most things that had to do with the Omegas. But there was one aspect of the Omega storyline that I can say with complete confidence is one of my favorite comic exclusive ideas to be introduced. The first Omega Blue Ranger, Kia. I adore this character. I think she's interesting, well written, and stands on her own in a sea of comic exclusive Rangers who struggle for the spotlight, which is especially notable in how she's a completely original idea and not A, a canon character's alternate counterpart, or B, inheriting a canon character's suit. At least not until very later on in her story. However, my love for Kia exists in spite of how her story is presented in the comics, not because of it, as she's yet another example of a character that ultimately gets screwed over for the benefit of the rest of the Omegas, specifically her replacement, Yale, who is a tiger. While we, the readers, first meet Kia as the Omega Team's Blue in MMPR number 41, the beginnings of the Necessary Evil event, in-universe she enters the story in the Go-Go Power Rangers side as the first of the Empowered, tracked down by Jason, Zach, and Trini at the behest of the Blue Emissary. When she gets zapped with Morphin Grid energy via the cracks caused by Draken's takeover of the grid, the sudden overload of power causes an explosion that kills her entire family and spurs the rest of her village into hunting her down as a witch until the Omegas are able to rescue her, and later recruit her on their team. She works well with the group for a while, but after shenanigans, she learns her excess Morphin Grid powers are due to Draken's nonsense, and upon meeting his counterpart, our Tommy Oliver, face to face, and fearing that he'll one day become Draken as well, she decides to turn against Rangers as a whole, kill the Blue Emissary, and lead the Empowered in becoming the new defense force of the universe. Thanks partly to the Ranger Slayer and Ari the Solar Ranger absorbing the Empowered's excess power into the Solarics, she is defeated and put in a jar. Her powers eventually get passed on to Yale, a previously empowered alien tiger, and she briefly gets recruited as the Blue Draken Ranger by Draken for his new team in the Darkest Hour event, until messing with the power eggs with Billy gets her, along with head of Promethea Grace and Coilless Universe Trini, wiped from existence. Now, from jump, I'm not going to say I wish Kia wasn't a villain. In fact, I think she's one of the better original villains in these books in her motivations, personality, and long-term goals all feeling more or less consistent and making sense. She believes that Rangers ruin the innocent Empowered's lives, including her own, so her increased paranoia upon learning Draken's counterpart exists in her time causes her to turn on them. And yes, she did do bad things. Murdering the Blue Emissary when their back was turned and then smashing Jason's head in the ground was indeed bad. Teaming up with obviously evil guys like Garrison Vox and Dane in the mission to take down Rangers was bad. She was a villain for a while. But she actually feels like a fleshed out sympathetic villain rather than the books just saying the planet-conquering warlords Zed and Rita are sympathetic and expecting you to agree with that. The problem comes from how it feels like, as the books go along, Kia is just steadily portrayed as worse and worse, from someone who was their friend who tragically betrayed them to someone who never deserved a chance in the first place and thus couldn't possibly be redeemed or get on a better path in life. Never mind the fact that the Omegas kept the truth of the origins of her new powers from her, powers that literally ruined her life in every possible way, and kept using her powers to round up people affected like she was and putting them in jars simply because they don't take the aforementioned capture well. Yes, there were people using the powers in a villainous way like Garrison Vox. We'll get to that later. As well as just the out-of-universe writing implications of her arguably being treated as less capable of sympathy and redemption than characters like Rita, Zed, or Draken. Whenever I would talk about Kia in the past, I would get people trying to tell me stuff like, well, Kia made bad choices. You know, she was just too toxic. Maybe one day she'll get redeemed. But not only does she not get redeemed. There's acknowledging that she was a good person who did bad things and could possibly turn herself back around, versus the narrative outright presenting her as the literal worst from the very beginning, nothing but a cautionary tale that no one even wants to try and empathize with. And the books consistently do the latter. And this is because they wanted her replacement to look better. The cat. Yale's first appearance is also in the Go-Go Power Rangers side of Necessary Evil, where he is the second empowered encountered by Jason, Zach, and Trini. He's aggressive in protecting a little alien kid he's found with, causing the Blue Emissary to send Kia down to save the team by knocking him out, after which the team bottles him up, telling the child, upset that he's imprisoned and pleading with the Omegas to not hurt him, that Yale is sick and is going somewhere safe. Funnily enough, the Omegas call Yale a dog here, though in his subsequent appearances he'll be referred to correctly as a cat. Yale doesn't show up throughout all of the MMPR side of Necessary Evil outside of background crowd appearances, but becomes a major character in the Power Rangers side of the MM/PR split, as that's the story arc where they become a ranger. They enter the story just on the Omega ship with everyone when they leave to track down the MP reels out of nowhere. The only explanation for it is the Omegas talking about how they're planning on delivering Yale back to their home planet, which is very weird to be worrying about right now when they're currently on their mission to stop MP reels. But regardless, this never happens, even after the MP reel storyline ends. Yale just ends up back on Safe Haven. It's a very clunky start to their new role as a main character, especially when them going back to their home, and supposedly going back to their owner, who's portrayed as loving him dearly, is never brought up again, since obviously they stay on Safe Haven after becoming a ranger. Here's Yale, they're just part of the group now. Okay. Their main role in the group and the issues leading up to getting the powers are basically just fighting support, though there's a tiny 2-issue arc where Zach learns to get along with them, and there are hints that he might be developing a friendship with Draken. It isn't until the lead up to him getting the powers that we see their actual backstory, told to us by the Blue Emissary's ghost as they discuss his potential to themselves. He gets separated from his family as a kitten when they're captured by poachers, but he's eventually found and adopted by the boy we saw in Go-Go Power Rangers. After they're imbued by Morphin Grid energy, he's cast off by the boy's parents, leading into the events of Jason, Zach, and Trini finding him later. Kia lets him out of the jar, notably apologizing for putting him in there in the first place, and offers for him to join her anti-ranger crusade, but they reject her and she lets him go, calling him unworthy. In the present, after Yale's been dropped back off on Safe Haven while the Omegas leave to find the Yellow Emissary, he saves some kids from a snake monster, and the Blue Emissary's ghost decides they're the one meant to become the new Omega Blue Ranger. Now, one thing I'll give their focus issue, Power Rangers number 10, is it does give us the best portrayal of Yale in the entire series. One that actually makes him feel like a real character beyond the team pet, because the art and story actually gives him more personality and depth through a more expressive face and anthropomorphized actions. During a fight with the alien snake monster attacking the kids, he outright uses his paws as hands to grab it and throw it around, something he never did or will never do again. And of course, Blue Emissary outright telling the readers what Yale is thinking and feeling throughout the course of their life, giving the impression that Yale has the ability to think and feel beyond a big house cat, as he's been referred to up until now. Because despite how I might sound, I don't hate Yale, at all. There's nothing to hate about Yale because they're an inoffensive concept. They're basically like a Disney princess animal sidekick that becomes a Power Ranger. And that's fine. That's awesome. I love that idea. And in a comic series that honestly doesn't do enough to make its OC alien design stand out beyond human or Technicolor human or Technicolor elf or Syrian, Yale is a refreshing subversion, and of course giving us our first quadruped ranger, possibly our only one. If Yale had become an additional ranger alongside Jason, Zach, Trini, and Kia, this essay wouldn't exist. My problem comes from how he contributed to, and honestly cemented, the villainization of Kia in the narrative by replacing Kia. They're taking the place of the character that's far more interesting and had more to contribute to the narrative, and the book has to justify this by making it very clear that Yale good and Kia bad. They're put on a pedestal as the correct choice for Omega Blue all along, that he earned his powers, that Blue was just too blind to realize how much of a meanie Kia always was and should have passed her over for Yale since the beginning. In the issue, the group of children he saves is clearly driving the contrast between the two candidates via a parallel to Kia and her motivations, with the bully of the group dismissing Yale and then claiming that he wants to protect everyone, while another counters that he only wants to control them, clearly connecting to the beginning of the issue where Yale meets Kia as she's beginning her anti-Ranger crusade and then calls him unworthy when he refuses to join her. Which, let's go back to Necessary Evil for a moment. For this section, I need to give you a better idea of how Kia was written, personality-wise, back in her debut arc. Both in and out of fights, where she serves as basically the team's trump card due to her increased strength of being an empowered, she's confident, self-assured, and friendly with the team, particularly Trini, but with a far more increased sense of empathy for the empowered compared to the other three, particularly the ones stuffed in jars. She notably is the first to ask how they can help Garrison Vox after he's brought back to Safe Haven, who actually was evil, and the cracks in her commitment to the Omegas first start to show when Blue locks up another prisoner, Kavotis, for killing the evil queen, keeping him prisoner, as she clearly does not agree with Blue's logic that Kavotis killing his abuser, who was using his power for evil in self-defense, was bad, straight up referring to him as a weapon, but Kia killing her family by accident was fine. She's not perfect. There are times shown where she seems a little too eager for a fight and lashes out when pushed, but for the most part, she was clearly a good addition to the team and friend. A good summary comes from the variant cover series, The G Records, where each Omega got a little featured biography and analysis of their personality by G. And G has this to say about Kia. Considering all she has endured, Kia has risen above to become a powerful ally in our efforts to repair the strange consequences of the shattering. Through ongoing observation, I have noted that although she can be difficult to engage with on a social level, she has an uncanny focus in battle, a natural desire to protect, and a strong sense of what organic beings call justice. Her biography also states that she is determined to protect the innocent and save those who had been affected by latent morphin energy as she had. Now, this is obviously written in a more positive light to hide the twist that she'll eventually become evil, as this cover came out pretty early in the series. But at the same time, it's entirely accurate. At the end of the day, her priority was the safety and livelihood of the people whose lives were wrecked by the actions of Draken, which ultimately ended up clouding her judgment when she started taking that protectiveness to the extreme and turning against the Rangers because of it. Now, contrast this to the parallel they're drawing between her and the bully in Yale's focus issue, where we're basically saying now that Kia never wanted to protect people, just control them. Ignoring how this is already inaccurate, as Kia's investment in the Empowered's well-being was established in her debut issue by her advocating for individuals as dangerous as Garrison and later Kavotis, long before she turns evil. In a confrontation between Kia and the Rangers when they return to Safe Haven after her betrayal, Kia spells out her terms very clearly. She doesn't want a fight. No one here is her prisoner, and they are free to leave if they wish. The Empowered on her side are clearly framed as having joined her willingly, and she doesn't touch anyone who didn't. This mindset is supported by how in Yale's focus, as stated, she lets Yale go when they refuse to join her, even if she did call them unworthy as they did so. She also talks to Yale as if they're on equal grounds with her in Sapiens, in contrast to how the bully dismisses Yale on the grounds that they can't talk. She even acknowledges the good the Rangers have done for the universe. However, she now believes the Rangers can't be trusted due to the damage done by Draken, so she doesn't want them to have that power anymore. But she enforces that by asking the Rangers to give up their morphers peacefully and go home. Things inevitably escalate into violence when the Rangers naturally refuse. I touch on this a bit in my first Omega video, but to go into more detail about her stance on the Empowered and how the Rangers treated them, the Omega's plan for helping them was terrible. The basic gist is that A, they find an Empowered, B, when they meet them, their levels of violence indicate whether or not they go in a jar, C, those who are not violent get to live peacefully on Safe Haven, while those they deem too dangerous get locked in a vault for their safety and others, for who knows how long, with no indication of if the Omegas check up on them and see if they're still bad or not. This mission was literally established as taking years to complete with this strategy, and there's no discussion on how to cure the Empowered or how to heal the cracks in the first place. The only reason the Empowered get healed at all is because of Ranger Slayer's knowledge of the Solarics, which can absorb morphin energy, making you wonder why Blue Emissary didn't just go to Ranger Slayer or the Solar Rangers in the first place. Their reasoning for picking Jason was that he was a leader in Shattered Grid, but Ranger Slayer was a leader too. And then at the beginning of Ultimate Power, the cracks are just randomly declared fixed out of nowhere because we just we have to move on from this plot now. The Omegas did nothing for the empowered except stick them in indefinite quarantine based on their standards of morality. And yes, as I mentioned, presumably there were other empowered like Garrus and Vox who were using their new power for evil. But that's just one example of a strictly evil empowered versus two examples of empowered who weren't, yet still get confined because they're considered too dangerous, Yale and Kavotus, which immediately puts this system into question. And the books themselves did admit the choices made were bad, to an extent. The final page of MMPR number 41 shows the many, many dumpsters in the vault in an ominous light, with Blue saying they have to do whatever it takes to prevent a shattering. All of the Omegas argued against Blue's decision to lock up Kavotus, as he was being used and abused by a higher, actually evil power who would have done terrible things with his power had he not killed her first. Because of scenes like this, a common theory was that Blue Emissary was the evil one here, or at the very least had gone rogue and getting more and more messed up in their desire to protect the universe. When the empowered ask for their punishment once everything is done, Jason says there's no punishment because mistakes were made on both sides. So, in the end, Kia was right to free the empowered. But I guess she went about it the wrong way so we can justify her staying locked up at the end. But hey, even if this ultimately ended up a little jumbled in its messaging, it is reasonable for the Omegas to not trust her anymore, and there was still hope that maybe one day Kia could be set free and repair their relationship. But by the Power Rangers series, this possibility is thrown out the window because this is where the erasing of Kia's good qualities and overemphasis on her bad ones begin. You have Jason saying, "We can't have another Kia." Ji alluding to her and how Blue put their trust in the wrong person and died for it. The Omegas being horrified over Yellow Emissary showing them Kia murdered Blue despite already knowing that she did it? And it's important to note that this is the event where the Omegas are willingly teaming up with Draken, the guy who caused her to snap in the first place, to the point that they wonder if maybe it's possible he can be redeemed and playing ball games with him. But besides reminding us of this oh-so-terrible thing she did, her murdering Blue is also apparently what started the Imperials rising in the first place, though important to note, no one knew this would happen. This will continue on in the Recharged/Darkest Hour event, where Billy is disgusted by the idea of Coinless Trini teaming up with Kia, conveniently forgetting how Trini herself had teamed up with Draken before. When teammates are captured, Trini says to Coinless Trini, "I'm sorry about Scorpina, though I'm less sorry about Kia," conveniently forgetting how the Scorpina she's talking about is indeed the Scorpina from Trini's home universe, the one who's also fought with her and her friends. And Trini and Kia's last conversation with each other amounting to Trini and Kia turning to the audience like, "Yeah, Kia's literally the worst and we'll never gain closure or repair our relationship ever," until she ends the series getting erased from existence in a plan that's arguably out of character for her to suggest. Kia wants to use the power eggs as basically Morphin Grid bombs to purge the grid of Dark Specter's infection, which could end up breaking it, when the grid breaking before ruined her life and was the whole reason she turned against Rangers in the first place. But at the same time heroic in intention, because Kia was really one of the few characters in the event to actually be proactive in stopping the villains. She blows up Safe Haven's Arch, which was the villains' gateway to other planets and timelines until Rita upgraded Keeper's staff. Kia leaves to find other Rangers, though couldn't find any not already infected. She comes up with a plan to purge the infection, even if it was risky, and it ends up costing her her entire existence. Meanwhile, Trini, what were you doing? Having your romance with Zach? And what was Yale doing? Hanging out in a cage? It gets to a point where it's less the Omegas are justifiably mad that Kia betrayed them, and more that the book itself wants to make it very clear to the audience. Kia is bad. Kia was always bad. And her being replaced by Yale is the best possible thing for everyone because of how hammered in how unlikable Kia and her attitude is now, reminding the audience of the terrible things she's done and framing her as worse than other villains. She has none of the softer, sympathetic traits that she had before. Her empathy, protectiveness towards the oppressed, her desire for justice, her grief over the loss of her family, because they don't want you to think she is sympathetic anymore. And what makes this especially frustrating is the entire theme of the Omega storyline in the Power Rangers side both before and after Kia's capture is that they're constantly hurting people in the name of doing good things, because it's what's necessary for the greater good. They break out Draken, the person Kia was so afraid of in the first place, who ends the event with his powers back loose in the universe. An SPD officer dies in their breakout of Astronema, known Ranger killer. The Omegas grapple with the moral dilemma of saving people from an MP reel, despite those people being part of a culture that steals and conquers and enslaves other planets. All of this is excused in the name of doing the wrong things for the right reason and not having a choice because morality is gray and not as simple as blow up bad guys because we are good guys. But for some reason, while this is an indication that they're just trying their best with what they're working with, Kia is an irredeemable monster who is just bad no matter how good her intentions were and has to be replaced by the morally and ethically perfect cat. And not even mentioning how literal warmongers like Zed and Rita can get storylines talking about the potential for their redemption all day, that they still feel love or were good once and can still be good again, or some higher power was the actual cause of their evil, when they've done far more terrible things for far longer than Kia, whose plan didn't even get off Safe Haven, and the one character she murdered, the Blue Emissary, comes back to life. In Darkest Hour, Rita gets treated with more sympathy when she willingly causes the near end of existence. Kia might have started the rise of the MP reels, but it's not like she knew that would happen. No one did. And yes, I know this is partly because the show itself redeems Rita and Zed, but that wasn't so much working towards redemption as it was forced soul cleanse via the Z-Wave. So not only is this frustrating in the erasing of Kia's nuances and the hypocrisy of the books applying themes like doing bad things for the right reasons and gray morality and redemption to other characters, it's especially insulting because while I praise Yale's focus issue specifically for subverting it, in everything outside of PR number 10, Yale is a pet. He's a pet. I'm sorry, guys. He's literally nothing but the team pet, especially after he gets the Ranger powers. Yes, it's very cute that they have a tiger in a Ranger suit, but character-wise, they're nothing. They're there to be cute and not argue with the Omega's way of doing things because he's a pet, and no matter how much the books try and insist that he's sapient, he really doesn't act like anything more than a more intelligent than average cat. Especially when his major scenes after becoming a Ranger amount to being good in a fight, someone pointing at him and going, "Hey, is that a cat? A cat is driving the Megazord?" Or he's the first one to get lost to the villain's corruptions. For a character whose journey to and moment of becoming a Ranger arguably gets more build-up and fanfare than any other OC, they certainly get more fanfare than Trini becoming Omega Red or Kevor becoming Omega Yellow in a single panel in a montage, and even Matt becoming the Green Ranger was treated more like a surprise, that guy you probably remember is a Ranger now. They quickly pivot into side character status after it's done. I think it's worth noting that the event immediately following Eltarian War and Yale's debut as a Ranger introduced characters Andros, Kevor, and Journey to the Omega storyline that all have a far bigger impact and personal stakes in the narrative. Journey in particular was immediately established as a focal character with lots of screen time dedicated to their development and relationships with the Omegas, to the point where a legit theory at the time was that Yale would die and Journey would become the new Omega Blue. Compared to Yale, who, chases space jellyfish, which Jason interprets as a sign he's spending too much time focusing on Draken rather than the bigger universe. Whether or not Yale was intentionally teaching him that lesson or just chasing jellyfish because he's a cat is ambiguous. It really makes it obvious that Yale now exists to fill the empty suit as a cute mascot rather than actually contribute a real character to the team dynamic, especially when all he amounts to in the actual storyline is being a third wheel tag-along to the Jason Andros plot before being the first to get zombified by a possessed Jason. And then in the final events, Recharged and Darkest Hour, they get a cute scene where they cuddle with an upset Kim, but besides that, once again, their major scenes amount to supporting people in fights until they're captured and turn evil. Ironically, in the final event, Kia is a far more important character, impacting the plot and characters than Yale is. It seemed like the entire point of Yale's journey to becoming a ranger was proving to everyone, including the reader, that he wasn't just the big house cat everyone assumed he was, but arcs afterwards never portrayed him as anything but a big house cat, because he's always doing house cat things and never expressing himself in ways other than how a big house cat would. This kind of disparity even happens outside of the main series, as in the side series Ranger Academy, they make a cameo as Professor Yale, who apparently teaches at the titular academy. But again, nothing comes from it except yet another, "Wait, is that a cat?" joke. Don't ask me how they teach a class because we certainly never get to see that. Whether or not you like Kia or agree with her actions, she added more to the story because she had a unique personality that added an interesting dynamic to the Omega team, who goes through arcs, who has defined opinions and thoughts and relationships, something Yale does not and cannot do because Yale is a mascot they can show off in covers and games before they're a character. I could have imagined how Kia would have acted in storylines like Jason meeting Andros, who lost everything and was looking for vengeance, or how she could connect with Kevor, whose life was uprooted by the actions of Rangers, which Yale can't do because Yale exists to be a cute cat. They do not go through arcs where they change or are challenged on a personal level because they are not presented as anything but perfect. They mostly just feed into others' arcs, mostly in those around them learning to accept who they are, rather than Yale themselves changing and growing. Blue's decision to make Yale a ranger is literally based on them saying they didn't realize Yale was always the perfect choice all along. Even Kevor, who was a ranger for 2 seconds, immediately establishes an arc for himself after getting his powers, where he worries that he's not good enough as a ranger because he doesn't stop Draken from freeing Kia and escaping through the arch. Admittedly, this plot doesn't go anywhere since Darkest Hour begins and takes over the story right after, but I think it's worth mentioning considering Yale was also in that scene and also failed to stop Draken. But it's Kevor who reflects on what happened and deals with the emotional fallout of it with Zack. As I said with how Yale's just a third wheel to the Andros-Jason plot in Charge to 100, they never contribute to Jason and Andros' 5 million conversations about grief and loss, even though their backstory shows that if he could communicate on their level, he could also connect with that. We don't even know if the Omegas know anything about his life prior to meeting them. And I'm not saying that I wish Yale could talk or whatever, but there are plenty of examples of animal characters throughout media that are able to be characters first and merch bait second. I think they wanted Yale to be like the Groot of the team, especially when the books establish the Birdman Archon can understand and translate Yale's meows into words, making you think he'll be Yale's interpreter from then on, or maybe the rest of the Omegas will eventually learn how to understand him too, but this never gets followed up on after Eltarian War. If not that, at the very least he could have been like Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon, or Maximus from Tangled, where he expressed himself and his own personality through actions and expressions. But in the end, he honestly comes off more like Bronx from Gargoyles, a cute pet character who's useful in fights and maybe gets a focus episode once in a while, but in the long run doesn't contribute anything substantial to the overall team dynamic because they don't anthropomorphize him enough. He's there to be the pet, and that's fine. That wouldn't be so bad if Yale was just one of the random side characters wandering around Safe Haven. But they're a ranger. They're supposed to be part of the main cast, a major character on par with all of the other rangers. But they only have the presence of a side character. Even less, since I can at least tell you things about Archon and G as characters, the arcs even they have been through. But whatever, Yale can't argue with the Omega's motives or desires or anything, so that automatically makes them a better fit for the team, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean, he's just good and Kia's just bad. That's the kind of nuance the Omega stories wanted, right? Now, I'm sure throughout this video you've been thinking, well, Chip, it sounds like you're just mad the storyline didn't go the way you wanted, and you know what? Yeah, maybe I am mad. Maybe I am mad that the potential of a character like Kia, who suffered from tragedy and abuse and made misguided choices, but was genuinely friends with the Omegas and acted in the name of justice and protecting people, was lost because she had to be recontextualized and rewritten into someone who never deserved the opportunity to do more in the first place, let alone a second chance to be better, because hee hee ha ha cute kitty. And that's reaffirmed by the books not even giving her any sort of ending, either through living or dying. She's not allowed the decency of letting her live a new life away from the Omegas after she's freed by Draken. Honestly, I was gunning for the possibility of her moving to and starting over in the Coinless universe with her new team, because she gets erased from existence. Billy, Tirona, and Scorpina all mourn Grace and Coinless Trini in some way, but no one brings up Kia after the initial report, not even the narrative itself. The story isn't even clear on if her plan worked the way they intended or not. I assume not, since after that the Rangers still had to go to the Zeo Crystal planet for the big morph to purge the infection plan. But if we actually had established breaking the grid did indeed allow for Rangers to morph safely, that at least would have ended the series on some sort of legacy for Kia. But we can't tell if that's what happens, because it's never confirmed either way. And even if it did, it gets overshadowed by the consequence of the grid shattering anyway, and Billy having to spend the rest of his life fixing it. So it's hard to see it as her having any sort of positive impact at the end. It makes me sad that I can't really enjoy Yale as much as I want to, because, again, an animal becoming a ranger is such a fun idea that can only be executed like this in a comic. And I'm always going to welcome a new spin on a ranger that isn't just alien-human biped. But I wish it didn't have to come at the expense of such a complex female character that had so much potential and was never fully expanded on, for a replacement that barely comes close to her in presence in the actual plots and dynamics with the rest of their team. I can't look at Yale and go, "Aw, I love the cute little kitty," without the addendum, but Kia and her thoughts would be so much more interesting in this situation. I don't know if we'll ever see the Omega characters in an official capacity again with the 2016 series done and the new main ongoing Power Rangers Prime set in a completely different continuity, but given Yale's cameo in Ranger Academy, I'm sure any reference will automatically be given to them in a similar manner, because really, who else would they shout out? Kevor? Don't be ridiculous. Which really adds to the idea that Yale exists to be the true Blue Ranger, while Kia should be forgotten and erased. And that's just really sad to me. At the very least, you could have made Yale a girl. How did you end the series with one girl on the team?